It is my great honor to be here. And as Jack mentioned, George Ritsack is not able to be here in person, but he sends his regards. He was very disappointed to not be able to make the trip. But I'm really excited to be here for the next couple of days with all of you, and really excited that we're able to offer this tutorial for all of for those who were not able to make it to the OHDSI US Symposium only a couple of weeks ago. I'm Patrick Ryan. I work at Johnson & Johnson, and I'm a professor at Columbia University. Today I'll be kicking off our tutorial. But before I do that, I would really like to take this opportunity, since I'm on the stage, to get a picture of all of you. So if you all wouldn't mind standing up and smiling, and we can pass out those little signs, I would love to check out everybody. Mask off if you're comfortable with that.
드실래요? 감사합니다. 같이 드세요.
I don't know which camera to look at. I've got the signs there. Very cool. Thank you very much. So I'm really honored to be here and excited for us to be able to do this tutorial. Before I start, I want to thank Jason and the team here at TNU for organizing this tremendous event and getting everybody together. It is a lot of work to be able to put on an event and have everybody come together, so I really appreciate everyone's support in making that happen. And also for inviting some of us to come to Taiwan to enjoy the fun with all of you. This tutorial is something that we developed in the OHDSI community this year as something new. The idea is to provide everybody a little bit of exposure to the entire journey from data to evidence. And so I hope, for everybody's benefit, that they're going to learn a little bit of something today that you might not have known before. Just so that myself and the faculty who are supporting you understand where you all are at, can you raise your hand if you are already familiar with the OMOP Common Data Model? Okay, maybe about half of you. Totally okay if you're not. Okay, so about half of you are familiar with the OMOP Common Data Model. How many of you are familiar with electronic health record data? Most of you. How many of you are familiar with insurance claims data, like the Taiwan National Data Set? Majority of you, okay. How many of you are clinicians, either clinical researchers or medical doctors? About a quarter of you, okay. How many of you would like to publish in high-impact journals around the world? Okay, Mark wants to twice. Okay. In terms of interest areas, in OHDSI we talk about a lot of different types of evidence that we're trying to generate. We often talk about 3 use cases. There's clinical characterization, which is doing descriptive statistics about things like disease natural history and treatment utilization patterns. There's a second category, which is population level effect estimation, which we can think of as causal inference, whether you're doing safety surveillance or comparative effectiveness research. And then we also have a third area, which is focused on patient level prediction. So applying machine learning to data sets to train and validate models. So I'm just curious of everyone in the room, who's particularly here interested in characterization and studying disease natural history? Raise your hand. Okay, not too many people excited about characterization, but that's okay. And who's interested in population level effect estimation, causal inference? Okay, a few more hands. And who's excited about machine learning and doing patient level prediction? Yeah, that's the sexy area. So since we've got Cynthia and Chun Su is going to help you with all of that. Okay. So this tutorial we specifically designed to try to give you a little bit of exposure to all of the steps along the journey from data to evidence. And so whether you're here because you know about the OMOP Common Data Model and want to use it, or you're not familiar with it, but you want to learn how data can be converted, you're going to get some exposure to that. If you're specifically interested in writing those high-impact journals, you're going to get exposure to articles. You're going to get exposure to how to do that through characterization, estimation, and prediction. I think what we've demonstrated as a community is that we have now established a strong set of scientific best practices and open source tools that make it possible for us to collaborate together to do things like publish high-impact journal articles. But that requires that all of us figure out the areas where we can contribute. I do not expect that any of you coming out of today's tutorial will feel like you're an expert in every topic, nor are any of the faculty members you're going to hear from experts in all of the topics. But rather, I hope that you come to an appreciation that together as a community, we need to be able to each contribute our own piece and be part of a bigger team to try to generate the evidence that can improve the lives of patients. So, with that, I'm going to jump in to our tutorial. And I want to just welcome everybody who's come on a Saturday? It's a Saturday. I don't know what day it is. It's a Saturday. So thank you for taking your Saturday to come spend some time learning with us. I hope that this will be an educational experience, and I also hope that it will be fun. I know that I am an American who speaks very fast, and so I'm going to please ask that if I am speaking too fast, yell at me to slow down. And just wave your hand and tell me to slow down, and it'll be okay. I also encourage all of you to be active participants. We've created a series of hands-on exercises, so you're going to get the experience of playing with some of the tools and learning. But at any time during any of this tutorial, you should feel comfortable to raise your hand and ask questions. And during the breaks, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or any of the faculty. Very explicitly, with again, appreciation to Jason and Alex and the entire team. Many of us are here explicitly because of you. Mark and Martine and I have traveled from various parts around the world to be here to help you. And our value of being here is to get the opportunity to interact with all of you. So please reach out to us and ask any questions that you may have. We start all of these sessions with a reminder about OHDSI's mission, which is to improve health by empowering a community to collaboratively generate the evidence that promotes better health decisions and better care. And today's tutorial really is about helping you all become more active members in this community and hopefully demonstrating to you how you can generate evidence and for us collectively to talk about what we can do together to improve the lives of patients around the world. And what you'll get exposure to today is an example of a study that was published in a high-impact journal that is a demonstration of all of the good work that we've done as a community. But what we hope you learn from this tutorial is how you could either contribute or hopefully lead a similar type of study yourself using the skills that you're going to learn today. I'm going to mention that we're going to go through a lot today, and one of the things we won't touch on so much is a summary about all the things that are going on in our OHDSI community. At the OHDSI US Symposium a couple of weeks ago, we released this book called Our Journey, which summarizes the collective accomplishments of our community. This is available electronically on the OHDSI website, so I would encourage you to look through it. And I also brought a couple copies in case anybody is interested in a hard copy I've got a couple that I was able to bring with me. But it is a nice demonstration of what we can as a community accomplish, and particularly because so many of you raised your hand at the interest in publishing high-impact articles, you can see that collectively as a community we have published more than 450 papers, including articles in most of the top journals around the world. And that is all by following the same best practices and using the same tools that you are learning about in this tutorial. And I want to thank Craig Saxon, who runs our communications in the Odyssey community, for preparing this book for our whole community. So this tutorial is going to be a walk through the steps of the journey from data to evidence. And as many of you have probably experienced, this journey is typically quite difficult. And it's difficult because data in its natural form is very messy and challenging to work with. And reliable evidence is something that we aspire to, but we don't necessarily always know what that is or how to get there. Now, part of the challenge of this journey from data to evidence that makes it complicated is that there is not one type of data and there's not one type of evidence that we're generating. When we think about data that we may want to interact with, there are many different types of observational data. Data sources we may work with may contain different populations, whether they be a general population or focused on a pediatric children or an elderly population. Some populations may have capture of specific socioeconomic disparities. Data sources can vary by the care setting. Some data sources contain only the experience that patients have in hospitals, while other data sets contain only the experience at general practice outpatient care. Similarly, we have some data sets that only capture care from the primary care versus others that are focused on specialty secondary care. There are a range of different data capture processes, whether that be claims data, electronic health record data, or clinical registries. And the health systems that data come from can be quite different, whether we're talking about an insured population or an uninsured population, or the fact that different countries have different policies. One of the things that I hope that you'll take away from the next 2 days is a recognition that this is why we need to work together as an Odyssey community, is to learn from all these different types of data. If you are here in Taiwan, there are many different recognized data sources, such as the Taiwan National Claims Database is a revered data source around the world for its completeness in the capture of the population. And that is very valuable, but it suffers from the typical limitations of administrative claims data. Similarly, here at TMU, you have a very rich electronic health record system that can be used for for important purposes. However, that is predominantly representing the care delivered at this hospital system, so may not reflect the totality of care for an individual. And there have been many important, valuable publications that have come out of the use of both the Taiwan National Claims Dataset and the TMU electronic health record data. But largely, those studies are challenged because they reflect one population, one group of individuals, and one data capture process. And while they are tremendously valuable data resources, if you are thinking about having an impact on a global scale, it's important to think about how you can learn from data beyond just Taiwan. And so one of the biggest opportunities that we are trying to create within the Odyssey community is that the rest of the world can learn from your experience in Taiwan, and that you can learn from the rest of the experience of data sets all around the world. And indeed, this symposium, using Odyssey APAC community as a catalyst, we already have data sets from Korea and Singapore and China, in Australia, in Taiwan, all coming together to allow us to understand health in an entire geographic region. But you're not alone in the Asia-Pacific region. You also have collaborators across Europe, in North America, in South America, who are also eager to collaborate. And if we want to publish high-impact journal articles, there's no better way to do that than for us to collectively learn about health across the world. And so one of the things that I want to encourage you to be taking away from what you're learning today is that what you learned about one data set can be applied to other data sets. And together as a community, we can learn how to learn from our collective set of data sources to generate more reliable evidence. I mentioned that there's also different types of evidence that are desired, whether that be characterization, estimation, and prediction. And what we've learned is that each of these areas requires its own set of scientific best practices and its own set of open source tools to enable this evidence to be generated. What I'm excited about in our community, however, is that we have started to establish those scientific best practices and have built tools to make it less cumbersome to generate this type of evidence. And I would encourage all of you, even if you're one of the folks who said you're mostly interested in machine learning, to take advantage of the opportunity to learn across these different use cases, because the tools and the best practices are broadly applicable. And if you can get comfortable with learning about all of these different types of evidence, you can have an even bigger impact in health. So today on the agenda, the prettier one up here, we have a lot of content that you'll be going through. After I provide this introduction, Morning and Mui and Alex are going to go through the OMOP Common Data Model in the process of standardizing your data to the OMOP Common Data Model through an extract, transform, and load process. And so you'll get some experience in understanding how that works and what tools are available. Even if you're not a person who's, if you think about yourself as more of the clinical researcher and not the person who does data processing, I strongly encourage you to pay attention, because one of the most critical failures we see in most research is when the person who's trying to answer evidence doesn't understand their data well enough. And one of the things we've learned in the OHDSI community is the power of establishing standard ways to understand data better, which is applicable no matter what your question is. After we go through that, Chan is going to provide you a tutorial of how to build cohort definitions. And we'll talk about what it means to phenotype specific diseases or exposures. And these serve as the building blocks for conducting analyses. And so Chan will show you how to think about the theory of phenotyping, and also give you some hands-on exposure to creating cohorts, and I think you'll get some exposure to the Atlas tool in this part. After that, I will walk you through how to think about evaluating your phenotypes and introduce you to some of the tools that have been developed in our community. And then I'll give you a hands-on exposure with the support of Sarah and Song to give you exposure to you'll have hands-on experience of doing a characterization analysis yourself using the Atlas tool. After that, Martine and Mark, and with support from Nicole, are going to give you an introduction to population level estimation and show you results of the study. And then Cynthia and Chung Soo are going to walk through prediction. And finally, Jason will close out our session today. What I want you to know, and I'm sure that I will also speak too fast and maybe confuse some of you, each one of these topics is a full day tutorial in and of itself. So if you feel like you didn't understand everything and you're wanting more information, just know that today is trying to give you a little bit of exposure to a lot of different topics. It is not intended to get you to be expert in any one of these topics. But if you are interested in any one of the topics, we will provide you the resources to learn more. And of course, we're all here to help you along your journey as you participate in the OHDSI community. So before I provide the clinical overview, I just want to summarize how we think about working together as one OHDSI community. In OHDSI, we are collaborating across a bunch of different areas. Open community data standards, open source development, methodologic research, and clinical evidence generation. And in today's tutorial, you're going to get exposure to each of those areas of collaboration. And we believe that it's essential that all of those pieces come together. That we understand our data, that we figure out scientific best practices, that we codify those best practices into software, and then that we apply that software to answer questions that matter. Oh, I forgot to ask, who here writes software? Raise your hand if you're a software developer. A few, okay. Okay, so for those of you who are developers, I also want you to pay attention to think about how you can contribute to the development community. And for those who didn't raise your hand, I want you to appreciate that you get to be the users of these great tools of the developers in the community. Now, in addition to these collaborations, OHDSI has established the world's largest observational health data network. And the way that this works as a distributed data network is that any organization who has access to patient-level data goes through the process of converting their data to the OMOP Common Data Model, and then runs these standardized open source tools against their data. The patient-level data never leaves the institution, so we protect patient privacy at all times. However, this allows us to send questions to data and return back answers from data. And we consider this to be what we call OHDSI network studies. The idea that any of you could posit a clinical question, can prepare a piece of analysis code that sites can choose to download and run, contributing back results which we can collaboratively interpret and disseminate through things such as high-impact clinical journals. This process that we follow relies on all of the best practices that we described. It also relies on those of you who have access to patient-level data to participate in the network. And it relies on those of you who are interested in publishing those high-impact journals to think about how to follow this process to run network studies. And you're going to see examples of how this is done today, but I want to encourage all of you, if you have a clinical idea in mind, to think about how that would fit within this framework. This is much, much harder than if you just have direct access to the TMU electronic health record data or the national claims data, because you've got it on your laptop and you can write some code and you can figure it out on your own. This requires discipline and requires an understanding of all the tools that you've developed. But what it enables is the ability for folks like Chan to publish a paper in JAMA using a wide collection of data across the US and Europe and Asia that would not be possible without this structure in place. Morning and Mui are going to go through the OMOP Common Data Model, but I just want to highlight that this is the foundation of what we're going to be talking about, the idea that data can be standardized. We're going to be talking about open source tools, and particularly using packages in Hades, and Martijn is the lead of our Hades working group, and he and Mark and others are delivering these open source software tools. So you have the experts in the room to teach you about some of these capabilities. All right, so in the last couple minutes, I want to just introduce a specific clinical question, which we are going to use as the common theme throughout the rest of the tutorial. So this is just to provide one idea so that you don't have to context switch throughout the day to get you started. We're going to be talking about hypertension medications. And in particular, we're going to be talking about two drugs, one called lisinopril, which is brand name is Zestril, and I'm showing you here an example of a screenshot of the product label of lisinopril, and another drug, hydrochlorothiazide. So lisinopril is a drug used to treat hypertension, and specifically by lowering blood pressure, it has been shown that it decreases the risk of cardiovascular events such as acute myocardial infarction or heart attacks and ischemic stroke. And this is one of many drugs called ACE inhibitors. So throughout the lecture, if you hear someone say lisinopril or ACE inhibitor, you can think about that largely interchangeably. But lisinopril specifically is the most commonly used first-line treatment for hypertension in the world today. And while it varies across countries, still a very large proportion of patients who are newly diagnosed with hypertension may be prescribed lisinopril as their first-line treatment to try to manage their hypertension. It turns out that lisinopril is a drug that has been demonstrated to be effective at lowering blood pressure, reducing heart attacks or acute myocardial infarctions. However, it does come with side effects. Specifically, lisinopril is known to cause a side effect called angioedema. And angioedema is swelling of the face and lips, which is, at the best of cases, just an inconvenience, but in the most extreme and worst cases, can actually result in your throat swelling to the point that you have difficulty breathing, and in very rare cases can actually be fatal. Now, this is a known side effect that had been identified through randomized clinical trials, but because we have a drug that is effective, the benefits of the drug are perceived to outweigh the risks of this serious but relatively rare side effect. Mark Suchard led one of the high-impact clinical journal articles that we published in the OHDSI community. This is a paper published in Lancet, where we examined the comparative safety and effectiveness of all different antihypertensive treatments. And in this study, of which many of Nicole and Chan and Martijn are here in the audience, are co-authors of this paper, we examined the benefits of hypertension treatments to figure out which ones seem to decrease the risk of heart attacks or myocardial infarction the most, but also looked at the comparative difference to figure out which drugs cause the most side effects. So you can think of lisinopril. We know it's effective at reducing heart attacks, but we know it causes angioedema. The question we were examining here is which drugs seem to have the best cardiovascular outcomes, and also which drugs cause the worst side effects. And what we were able to demonstrate in this paper was by systematically analyzing not only ACE inhibitors as one class of drug, but the other first-line drug therapies that might be used, including ARBs, calcium channel blockers, and thiazide diuretics. We were able to understand which of these classes of treatments may be most effective. And specifically, through a series of publications in high-impact journals, we're able to particularly identify that ACE inhibitors, and lisinopril in particular, may have roughly equivalent cardiovascular effects, however, has increased side effects, and therefore may not be the recommended first-line treatment for hypertension. And this finding has the potential to impact hundreds of millions of patients around the world, and is now being adopted by various clinical guidelines. When we specifically looked at ACE inhibitors versus thiazide diuretics, and you'll hear us talk about hydrochlorothiazide as a specific drug, we can look across a wide range of different outcomes. Looking at cardiovascular events at the top, but working our way through all of the different side effects. And here we can specifically see angioedema as one of those events where there's a pronounced difference, showing that lisinopril has a much higher risk of angioedema than thiazide diuretics. This idea that we can systematically conduct analyses across a large set of outcomes for a large set of comparisons across a large set of databases is something that was inconceivable to just about anybody else in the world, even maybe just 5 or 10 years ago. But now, because of the OHDSI tools, studies like we've done here with Legend become feasible, and become opportunities for us to generate more evidence in high-impact journals like we did here. What we're going to do in today's tutorial is show you some of the building blocks of how we conducted that exact same study. So you could do parts of the legend study yourself. And actually, I'll just stay over here. Throughout today, you're going to have an opportunity to have hands-on exposure to various tools. You're going to use, and maybe if you, probably doesn't matter that much. It just says, if you want to take a screen, since I see lots of you with your cameras out, if you want to take a picture of that screen, just have the URL, but we'll also provide it for you as well. There are 3 things that we have created as a tutorial environment for you to have exposure to. The first is Atlas. Atlas is a web-based tool where anybody can point and click their way through designing observational analyses. I think Jan will probably be the first one to give you exposure to Atlas, where you're going to design cohorts. And I will also show you how you can design characterization analysis. And then I think Martijn is going to show you how you can actually design estimation studies using the Atlas tool. And so this is a web page. We'll give you guys a username and a password you can log on and play with. The other 2 things that we've made available for you, we probably will not use today, but we want you to have exposure to them. The second link there is a Jupyter notebook. For those who are familiar with run analysis, show of hands, how many of you know R as a programming language? Well, actually, most of you are R programmers. That's very good. Okay. Raise your hand if you're a Python programmer. A few less hands, correct? How many of you write code in SQL? Some in SQL. How many of you are SAS programmers? Okay. You're not going to get to do any SAS things. Sorry. So for those who are familiar with working with Jupyter notebooks, we've created an environment where you could create a notebook, and whether you are programming in R or Python, you can connect to a database and work. The second thing we provided you is an access to an R Studio environment where you could write your own R code to perform analysis if you wanted to. We will not use these environments in any of the tutorials, but we've created them because you may be interested in having exposure to it, and we encourage you to do that. The other tools that we will use, many of our applications as a standard output produce R Shiny applications, and they are all posted on hosted on data.odyssey.org, and so you will get exposure to actually interacting with R Shiny objects throughout the tutorials as well. So, without further ado, given that we are going to be talking about lisinopril and ACE inhibitors and their benefits on cardiovascular events like acute myocardial infarction and their risks associated with angioedema, I want you to think about that clinical question as we walk through the journey from data to evidence, which will land with us being able to characterize how often do people who take lisinopril have myocardial infarctions, to estimate what is the risk of angioedema between those exposed to lisinopril versus hydrochlorothiazide, and to be able to predict amongst the people who are lisinopril users who are the patients who are going to go on to have myocardial infarction. So all of those clinical use cases are going to be followed based on this one clinical question. So before I turn it over to Morning and Mui, let me stop and see if there's any questions. You don't have to be shy. Was I speaking too, raise your hand if I was speaking too slow. Raise your hand if I was speaking too fast. Raise your hand if I was speaking the right speed. Okay. All right. At least you're raising your hand. All right. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to Morning.